What's upcoming? Two players who didn't get mentioned yesterday. A little look at Alec Burks and his comps. Some thoughts on Gordon Hayward's season. Heat in the Pacers. Maybe a college football note. And more. All coming up on today's edition of Tip Off. What do I do with my life now? There's no game to be done. I go on field trips with my kids today. Antelope Island, here I come. The Great Salt Lake. Middle school plays. How's everybody? I don't know how yesterday's tip-off was. The day after locker clear-out, probably no different than for like a teacher at the end of a school year, is completely my day of hibernation. Uh, and I was just so out of it yesterday and took the kids to school and promptly just came back and went to sleep for most of the day. Got up, went on a mountain bike ride with my wife, and then got up when the kids came back uh, and then did some work later last night that you'll see. But that's I don't know. Yesterday that could be a funky edition yesterday. For those who don't know, the plan is to still bring you tip off. When I go on vacation, which I got a few planned, I don't know what we'll do. I think I will do it every now and then. I'm sure I know what my wife thinks. And she's pretty supportive, so I probably should be careful there. But I'll try to get posts up almost every day. Last night we got an Alec Burks one up. I really liked the other day where I took some questions from you and then used Sula or Sulia or whatever it is to be able to answer them in a longer form. I thought that was kind of cool, so I might do that more often. And we'll do some vocals and Google Hangouts because Google Hangout just expanded. So a lot of stuff still coming up. Still plan to communicate. And you guys at this point are the diehards. Anybody who's still listening to this is either lifeless or really big fan. I'm going to go with really big fan. I am curious, though, if you have a moment to email me at either dlock09@gmail or I guess you can send me some on Twitter if you don't care about clogging up your timeline. I'm curious on how you get this. I'm always curious what percentage of you are actually watching this. I still am not quite sure why we video it. How many of you just get it on your iTunes? How many just listen to it straight off the computer? So I'm curious, are you listening to it as an audio? Are you listening to it as a video? And what application are you bringing it through? If you don't mind, I'd be curious. And since it is the diehards. Yesterday, there were two players that I wanted to mention that I just think are fabulous, that don't get a lot of pub, and they don't fit kind of what we highlight in this league too often. And I thought their impact was shown that night, and then I looked down at the clock, and it was like way past when I was supposed to get the kids. So I started earlier today. The first one is Andre Miller. The former Ute is just – he's got all these deficiencies, and, in Portland they highlighted those deficiencies, not particularly athletic and can't shoot the outside shot. He is the best time and score player in the NBA. And what I mean by that is he understands what's going on the floor at the right moment, what's needed, how to play, how to involve his teammates, what to do. It's terrific. Defensively, he's got all sorts of things wrong. And I wonder if you had him for a whole season, if you'd start to pick him apart. But to me, if you go back to the beginning of the year, I don't believe I had Portland as a playoff team. And the reason I didn't was because of the loss of Andre Miller and the addition of Raymond Felton. And that's just a huge issue. Your point guard, time and score-wise, and understanding of the game. I almost feel like we have another Andre Miller coming out. I think Kendall Marshall of North Carolina might be Andre Miller. I got to watch him some more. But he's not athletic enough. He's very limited in that regard. But, boy, he's a fabulous passer. And his time at North Carolina, I think he may have understood what time and score is more than any other. But on the other end, I'm not sure we've had many Andre Millers in 12, 14 years. The obvious next question is, would he fit the Jazz? I think he'd be great. The problem for us, though, is, gosh, we're so poor three-point shooting team that if you go replace Devin Harris with Andre Miller, and the only way to do that would be you sign Andre to a contract, and then in that deal. You probably trade Devin with 1 year remaining to Denver. Uh, you know, gosh, if we think we're actually trying to play Paul at the 3, which I still have huge questions about, and Hayward is the 2, or Burks any, and then Miller, you could have lineups again without any 3-point shooters. So uh, I think Andre would be fabulous for us, but our lack of 3-point shooting at the other positions, predominantly the 3, uh, makes it very hard to play Andre. Andre's pretty good when he's on the floor with Al Harrington, I would bet, because Al Harrington's playing the stretch 4, and I don't see us with any sight of a stretch 4 anytime soon the way we play the game. The 3-point shot has got to become more of our in our arsenal a bit more. It's too important part of the game, and Memphis doesn't really do it a lot. LA doesn't do it. They're both in the playoffs. They both have been exposed a little bit in the playoffs of how difficult that is. It actually is not as much of a necessity as almost as I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, in the sense that 3 or 4 years ago not everybody was doing it, and those teams who did it had a huge advantage. Now it feels like everyone's doing it, and you build your team a little bit differently, and I think it would be nice to increase it in our repertoire. The one area where we don't shoot the 3, and it'll be curious to see how that plays over time, is something the Spurs do a lot. The Spurs shoot a lot of transition 3s. The Spurs, and they shoot about 44%, if I remember correctly, on our synergy stuff, on the transition 3. We don't believe that's an area that we don't believe in. I'm wondering. I wasn't planning on talking about this. It just kind of came up, which is the beauty of this random stream of conscious tip-off. I'm going to see if I can pull it up really quickly. I doubt I can. And the minute I actually start searching stuff on the web, I often end up with a bad feed on the YouTube, so I may stop. But it's worth looking into to see. I'll write that down as a note. Transition 3 usage. See how much less we do that than other teams. That seems like a decent blog post coming up. So anyway, Andre Miller is one. The other was Al Horford, who is, boy, Al Horford probably could add a little back. Again, it's the player who you can focus on the things he doesn't do. Al Horford's the center for Atlanta. You could probably put a little focus on what he does in regards to his lack of back-to-basket play, and lack of shot blocking, protecting the game at the rim. But he moves laterally fabulously. The play he made on Rondo on the final play of the game to win the other day was terrific. I think we've all seen, as much as you'd like your big guy to have protection of the rim, Al's pretty good protector at the rim, and he's pretty terrible laterally, and I'll bet you a lot of us would trade. He's able to hit the 14, 15-footer as a big, which, I don't love because it means you never get fouled, but he's a pretty neat player. I like Al Horford. And I think it's a big deal Atlanta got them back. In fact, the second round of the playoffs, well, Atlanta beats Boston if they could do it. I don't know if they can, but Boston it looks like they're wearing down already. Whoever gets Philly is going to advance. The winner of Atlanta-Boston is going to advance. And then the second, the Pacer-Heat series. One note on Horford. I just pulled this up. I did know I was talking about him. Horford doesn't go to the free throw line either. He goes to the free throw line about as rarely as Al does. 7% of his possessions, which is really pretty terrible for a big guy. But he comes off very high on my charts of efficiency and where he ranks and as a big man. And that's because he shoots 56%. And he shoots 80% from the free throw line. These are all numbers from a year ago. He played very rarely this year. But he shoots 56%. If you're not going to go to the free throw line as a big, really that's what you have to do. You have to shoot 56% or so. That Miami, we'll get to I got Burks and Hayward coming up here in a second. That Miami-Indiana series I think is going to be very interesting. And I know Indiana is not a team that that anyone seems to know or has done much work on or thought about yet. But let me say this about them. If they start George Hill and Paul George and Danny Granger and David West, other than Roy Hibbert, they can switch every pick on the floor. And if you go look at whatever's caused Miami problems, Atlanta's caused Miami some problems because they can do that too. Now, whether Frank Vogel's going to do that or not, I don't know. But if Danny Granger decides to defend in this series, which is always a wild card because he doesn't always do it, then they can really give him a hard time. To the Jazz, sorry, we're 10 minutes in. By the way, the focus on this is always going to be Jazz, NBA, Utah, and then I'll touch on the other stuff that's out there as this goes on for the upcoming weeks, months, until we play again. And yes, my opening tip was accurate. Today I will be attending the kids' field trip to Antelope Island and heading to Antelope Island as well as the Great Salt Lake and a middle school play and some cool stuff like that. You gotta do it. Part of me loves it. Part of me wants a gun to the head, right? I did Alec Burks comps last night, and I wrote a huge piece on it on weareutahjazz.com. A bunch of names came up. I really think the name that came up that's pretty comparable is Tyreke Evans, but Evans gets to the cup and is bigger and stronger and finishes a great deal. So 3 other names came up. Larry Hughes, who actually it's a pretty good comp. I never loved Larry Hughes as a player because he was so inefficient offensively, and he never became a good shooter. And so I'm reluctant that I go with Burks' comp. I'm actually, Hughes was a borderline all-star player at one point, averaged I think 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and teamed with LeBron for a while in Cleveland and in Washington. He was one of the lead dogs and was big, but he always shot 40%, and he's one of those guys the number guys never really liked, except for the one year he went to the free throw line about 7.5 times a game. And so I would admit that I don't love that comp a great deal. The other ones that showed up were Luol Deng and Russell Westbrook. Deng's interesting because I think he's shown how much you can survive without shooting the three. He's done at the 3 position, then rebounded. Deng's one of the elite rebounders for that position. Between Noah Boozer and Deng, Chicago's got 3 of the best rebounders at their position. And then Russell Westbrook came up. I mean, I think we've forgotten how bad Russell Westbrook was his first year in the league. I'm not sure Burks has the handle that Westbrook has, and I think Westbrook's really very special with his tenacity. What I think is important on the Burks comps, and I'd suggest you take the time to dig into it and read it at We Are Utah Jazz /LockedOnJazz. WeAreUtahJazz.com/LockedOnJazz. Is just kind of who the names are that came up. And the first run was a Chris Paul, John Drew, Carmelo. I mean, they're all very good players. And it gets down to that the basic skill set that Burks has leads him into pretty good company. Now, his minutes played were considerably less, and his scoring opportunities were considerably less than these other guys, which makes it hard to determine in a lot of ways and makes some of those comps difficult. But I would say that there's it's pretty interesting, and I'd say pretty exciting. A few guys, James Harden shows up on the list, but it's not a good comp. Harden used 31% of his possessions to shoot a 3. Burks isn't there yet. He's at 10.5. He really, frankly, he comes out almost about as close on a comp as you can to Larry Hughes. He's just slightly more efficient than Hughes, who was an inefficient player. And so if you have Larry Hughes at a higher level of efficiency, you've got a pretty fabulous player. That's worth getting pretty excited over. So I'd say the Burks trends very, very well. Kevin Pelton was IMing me last night trying to say that if I did some things different with my switch, I'd get some more people who never figured out how to shoot, which may be true. I'm not sure that I entirely saw that, and then I went to bed when that IMing was continuing. The next one I did some work on, and I will have this posted and finished up today for you, is some Gordon Hayward notes. Gordon Hayward's, there's actually two things I thought were interesting. If you just look at Gordon Hayward inside his draft class this year, he's pretty unbelievable. He was one of the top 3 players, excuse me. He was one of the top 3 players in his draft class. In just about every metric, and in some of them he was the best. I like the points per scoring opportunity, which is you take points and you divide it by field goal attempts, then followed by field goal attempts plus trips to the free throw line. So anytime you had a scoring opportunity is the way I look at it. He was number 1 in his draft class in points per scoring attempt. It's a highly efficient player right there. And he goes to the, he has a neat combination that I'm going to look into today of going to the free throw line at a pretty high rate and shooting the 3 at a high rate. Nowhere near Gallinari and Harden, who are the only two in the NBA, in the Western Conference, who really, or actually in the whole NBA, who do this at an amazing level. I mean, Harden this year used 32% of his possessions to shoot a 3 and got to the free throw line almost 18%. There's only, I haven't done it, but there's only, I believe, 3 guys that are 15% of their possessions at the free throw line and 20 of their possessions shooting threes, which is just a masterful combination. And that's Gallinari, Love, and Harden. Those are 3 of the best offensive players in the league. Gordon's just a notch below that. He's at 13% of his possessions. He went to the free throw line, and 20% of his possessions he shot a 3. And I don't think a lot of guys are doing that. I'm going to probably run that search. I'll have that up for you this afternoon. That'll take some time. The thing I've noticed when I've run comps on Gordon, and it's worth running again and trying to figure out, but the note I would have on Gordon, he comes up, and I think this is going to be very interesting to see in his career. When I compare him to the draft class, he comes up. I mean, he's remarkable for that class. Now, that class is somewhat of a disaster, frankly. When I ran my Locke offensive rating of draftees who, in that draft class, who played 1,000 minutes last year, 6 of the 8 worst offensive players were 6 of the top 8 picks. And then Hayward and Monroe are pretty good, but the other guys are terrible. And Paul George. Which is, Paul George, Gordon Hayward, and Greg Monroe have been decent out of that draft class. Everybody else has been pretty awful. The thing on Gordon I would say when I run a bunch of these numbers is he comes out just a notch below. In other words, you run all these numbers and you look and you get some really big names and you find some fabulous players. If you really look at it, everything about him is just a notch below that. And my thought is that's probably where he's going to be in his career. He's going to be a fabulous player that helps you win. I don't know if he's ever an NBA All-Star. He thinks he can do it. He may be right. And remember, when I'm running his numbers at this point, I'm running his entire second season. And that group of the second season guys has had some real drawbacks or things that are relatively unfair because of the lockout. I think that's the group that was bothered the most. And so it's, you look at some of those things and you come up with, I don't know. I mean, I think you just you run it. He's just, I can run these searches and then there's the guys, your initial look to the left and you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the names he compares to. But then the next stage of it is you actually look at it a little deeper and it's not close. Those guys are putting up, Gordon's putting up per 36 minutes about 3.5 rebounds and 3.5 assists and about 12, 14 points. And his points are just the lowest of the group by far. And his points and rebounds are pretty good. But anybody else who's doing those things are actually like Wade and LeBron. But they're really doing it. So I just think he comes in, which is fine. All right, final note. Blazers interviewed David Morway. Morway actually is a Salt Lake guy. His wife, or Scott Ties, his wife's a Salt Lake native. Is the GM right now at Indiana, who's done a great job. Blazers are trying to find a GM. That would be a very good hire on their part. Morway's done a fabulous job in Indiana, so we'll keep an eye on that as well. The quick college football note I had for you: Sporting News put out a list of the top coaches in college football. It's great season filler, excuse me. Um, Nick Saban was one. Chris Peterson at Boise was two. Urban Meyer's three. Les Miles four. Bob Stoops five. Chip Kelly was the top Pac-12 coach. Yes, two guys on the 12 will come back this year. Gary Patterson was seven. Spurrier was eight. Frank Beamer was nine. And Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State was 10. Thought that was interesting. Kyle came out from the quick scan I did when I saw this morning. Kyle came out about fourth in Pac-10 coaches, which is probably appropriate. I would say it means he's not elite, but only by a notch. Like you got to be in the top two or three to be elite, but he's probably hasn't proved that yet. All right, that's tip off. Please tell me how you get this. I'd be curious to know, and hope you enjoyed 20 minutes of me aimlessly babbling this morning. Hope you're good.